The Boeing B-29 Superfortress is most famously remembered for a single world-altering act, delivering the atomic bombs that brought World War II to a shocking end over Hiroshima and Nagasaki. However, its legacy extends far beyond this single mission, as it was arguably the most technologically ambitious and revolutionary aircraft of its era. As the war's most expensive military project, costing significantly more than the Manhattan Project itself, the Superfortress was a colossal marvel of engineering. It boasted a fully pressurized cabin that allowed it to fly higher than any enemy fighter could reach, and two enormous bomb bays capable of carrying the heaviest payloads of the war rushed into service to conquer the vast distances of the Pacific. It was the only Allied bomber that could consistently strike the Japanese mainland. Yet for all its power and sophistication, this symbol of American aerial supremacy held a vulnerability that would lead to it being stolen by a wartime ally, sparking a desperate international pursuit. It all started with a raid that proved why America needed a plane like the B-29. In April 1942, Colonel James Doolittle commanded a daring mission launching 16 B-25B Mitchell bombers from the heaving deck of the United States carrier Hornet. The first direct bombing raid on Tokyo was underway as the planes headed for the Japanese home islands with a full belly of fuel and explosives. It was a costly but necessary boost to Allied morale. But it also revealed a critical weakness in America's arsenal: the lack of a true strategic long-range bomber. It was a need that Doolittle himself highlighted in his post-mission report. At the time, America's best bombers weren't up to the task. The B-24 Liberator, an incredibly versatile aircraft, couldn't meet the War Department's new requirements for range, speed, altitude, and payload. Neither could the legendary B-17 Flying Fortress. While they were both performing heroically over Europe, they were already being outmatched by new designs being developed back home. The race for a super bomber was on. The Douglas XB-19, a massive aircraft, first flown in 1941, served as a flying laboratory to test out big plane concepts. But in 1940, the War Department put out a call for a bomber that could blow past the XB-19's underpowered performance in every way: speed, altitude, payload, and range. Boeing and Consolidated threw their hats into the ring. Consolidated came up with the B-32 Dominator, powered by 4 Wright R-3350 engines. It was pressurized, but despite its size, it wasn't a huge leap forward. It felt more like a safe, conservative step, a backup plan, and that's exactly what it became. Only 15 B-32s ever saw active duty, serving as an insurance policy in case Boeing's radical new design, the Model 345, was a failure. The Boeing giant, designated the XB-29, won the competition. The specs were astounding for the era: a range of nearly 4,000 miles, a top speed over 350 miles per hour, and a service ceiling over 30,000 feet, all while carrying a 10,000-pound payload. The first XB-29 took its maiden flight on September 21, 1942, over Boeing Field in Seattle. Test pilot Eddie Allen noted the engines were a bit underpowered, but otherwise the plane flew beautifully. But the B-29's development was plagued with problems. The early Sperry gun system and 3-bladed propellers were soon scrapped. While the first XB-29 provided a wealth of crucial data, the second one met a tragic end. On only its second flight, it burst into flames. Eddie Allen, his 10 crew members, and 19 civilians on the ground were killed. But these devastating losses couldn't be allowed to stop a mission this vital to the war effort. The XB-29s were soon flying again. The first of 14 pre-production olive drab YB-29s was airborne by June 1943, putting the plane's radical design theories to the test. The 29's enormous bomb bays were located in front of and behind the center of gravity. A device called an intervalometer timed the bomb releases from alternating bays to keep the plane stable during a drop. An intervalometer released the payload from alternate compartments to ensure stability during drops. The personnel quarters were equipped with soundproofing, pressurization, and heating. The bombardier occupies the extreme nose of the aircraft in the forward compartment situated beneath and between the captain and co-pilot. The pilot occupies the left seat. The co-pilot is located on the right. Facing forward, the navigator is situated behind the pilot. Located behind the co-pilot, the flight engineer is facing aft. Behind the flight engineer, the radio operator is facing right. The gun commander is situated in a barber's chair in the aft compartment alongside a rest area. He is observing the aircraft through a plexiglass blister atop the aircraft. The two flank gunners were located to the left and right of him. The early blister cages were installed to prevent the crew from being pulled out in the event of a blister popping. The putt-putt auxiliary starter motor is operated by the rear gunner. His typical position is in the pressurized rear compartment. The wings, which were positioned mid-fuselage, were quite revolutionary. Boeing abandoned the conventional bridge truss configuration in favor of a web-type structure. For low-speed flight takeoff and landings, flaps could enhance the wing area by up to 1/5. The retractable twin-wheeled tricycle landing gear was a significant advantage for such a heavy aircraft during high-speed landing maneuvers, even after extensive combat damage. Another innovation utilized by the 29 was the General Electric remote gunnery control system. Remote sighting and firing were implemented for each firearm. 4 of the turrets, 2 of which are located on the top and 2 of which are located beneath the fuselage, are capable of rotating 360 degrees in azimuth and 90 degrees in elevation. The rear turret is more constrained in its mobility, but it is equipped with a 20mm cannon in addition to the twin 50s that the others have. However, the most significant aspect of the 29's armament is that the gunners are not permitted to operate the weapons. Almost any turret can be fired by any gunner, as the weapons are remotely controlled from specialized sights. For instance, a single side gunner may be responsible for discharging 4 caliber 50s at his target, while simultaneously controlling 2 turrets. Wind temperature, altitude, speed, and extended range were corrected by a small central computer that accounted for projectile drop. Gunners who employed this remote system encountered no gun vibration or startling recoil, facilitating the process of maintaining an objective in view. The reality of combatants being shot down is harrowingly captured on gun camera footage. By the discharge mechanism, the camera is activated. It is depicted here as being mounted between the twin machine guns of the stern lower turret. Pressurization was necessary for extended missions at high altitudes. The circular cross-section hull of the 29 provided the requisite uniform strength. The pressurization was regulated by the Boeing auto pressure regulator. 3 compartments were pressurized. The aft gunner's compartment was connected to the nose compartment by a long 34-inch diameter conduit. Additionally, the rear gunner's compartment was pressurized.
The fact that it was pressurized and the altitude was brought down to simulate 8,000 feet, that whenever any kind of a window pops out or a rupture from, if it's in combat, in the fuselage, would cause a sudden rush of air out of that to equalize the pressure, and especially when you're at higher altitudes in the thin atmosphere. And so, because we had to travel from the forward deck to the back, over the bomb bay, through a tunnel, which was a little bit confining in that you couldn't wear your parachute with you, but while you're in that tunnel, if you should suddenly depressurize at that time, you got the feeling that you might be a projectile in a cannon going shot right through the tunnel. So I was a little apprehensive about going in there at times, especially at high altitudes.
The engines were the most intricate and potent ever constructed at the time. 4 turbo-supercharged Wright R3350 radials that generate 2,200 horsepower. The massive propellers were designed to rotate at a glacial pace to optimize their performance at high altitudes. This spacecraft was exceedingly unique. The United States is now prepared for wartime production as a result of the events at Pearl Harbor. In January 1942, the number of B-29 orders was doubled to 500. Labor constraints are anticipated. Unskilled personnel were granted simplified procedures. The designs were deconstructed into components to be distributed to numerous production facilities across the United States. The nation was also home to final assembly production lines, Bell's Marietta factory in Georgia, Boeing's new plant in Wichita, Kansas, the Martin plant in Omaha, Nebraska, and Boeing's Renton plant in Washington. Before a single prototype had been flown, 600 B-29s would be ordered. The B-29 project had been impeded by its extensive logistical and organizational issues, resulting in a halt in progress. The Battle of Kansas was imminent.
The situation was that the B-29 had to be sent to war within a specified time, and it was the job of the people under the command of Arnold to make that happen. So they ended up with a situation that they had approximately 5 weeks to get the B-29 into action. And unfortunately, they found the worst weather conditions possible. They had problems with transportation of parts. And they also were dealing with a situation where they had partly trained crews who were trying to complete modifications to the airplane. As things went wrong and had to be replaced, these crews learned on the job. And you had a situation, for instance, where they were fitting modified radar sets, but they had never fitted radar sets before of any kind.
Under direct presidential pressure, Arnold intervened. It was reported that 60 armchair generals showed up there to impress him. But he meant business. Signing the 175th on 29th of March, Arnold asked that it be ready by March 1st, 1944. By the 28th of February, the Hap-Arnold Special, along with all 29's preceding it, had been released. Before the deployment of the Superfortress to India and the Pacific, an elaborate cover strategy was carried out. Hobo Queen, the only YB to serve in active duty, was dispatched to India via England. It toured the United Kingdom for 2 weeks, attempting to mislead the Axis into believing the 29 would be employed in Europe. Within an hour of landing, a German reconnaissance aircraft was sighted flying overhead. China has been the target of Japanese hostility for many years. There was an opportunity to strike back. Mainland China proposed forward stations near Japan for the new B-29s, destined for permanent bases in India. The Pacific presented the issues that inspired the design of the 29. B-17 and B-24 had both proven to be excellent aircraft over Europe, flying shorter distances from base to target. The Pacific presented enormous logistical challenges with large stretches of ocean that conventional warfare had not before met. The B-29 was the only airplane capable of reaching Japan. The 20th Bomber Command was formed, particularly to bring the B-29s together as a unified force to attack Japan. The 58th Very Heavy Bombardment Wing consisted of the 40th, 444th, 462nd, and 468th Bombardment Groups. They were on their way to India, half a world away, where it would be hot and dusty. Traveling east, the first stop is Gander Bay, Newfoundland, across the Atlantic to Marrakesh, Cairo, Karachi, and then Calcutta. In preparation, thousands of Indian workmen and United States construction personnel renovated Indian airstrips to accommodate the large bombers. The bases were located throughout northeast India, including Karangapur, Chakulia Piadoba, and Dudhikindi. China's forward bases were located in the Chengtu Plains, close to Japan's southern islands. Everything had to be transported from Calcutta by a large airlift via the Himalayas' craggy peaks and deep canyons. The dangerous ridge, shrouded in ice and mist, stood between the broad plains of Chengtu and the forward bases. Converted, 29 tankers flew the route. 3 gallons were consumed for every gallon of petroleum offloaded at Chengtu. 4 airstrips, each 500 feet long, were built to service the massive bombers. Each boulder was transformed into handcrafted gravel to fill and level the former rice paddies. China harnessed one of its most valuable resources, people. Over 1/3 people labored on the project, utilizing rudimentary barrows, buckets, and wooden tools to transform the terrain. Fighter planes also needed to be accommodated. Strips were constructed for them in southwest China. These rollers weighed up to 10 tons and were pulled by as many as 100 men. The sheer amount of manpower was astonishing. But all of this costs money. Generalissimo Chiang Kai-shek charged the United States government more than $200 million in gold for the attempt. By April 1944, B-29s were landing in China preparing for June raids. Raids that would be unsatisfactory. The great distances at high altitude, the hazardous Himalayas, and the gorgeous airstrips of Chengdu were turned into $200 million swamps by relentless rain. The early assumption that the B-29 could support itself was incorrect. The fuel supply across the hump could not keep up with demand. After the first raid on June 14th, raids were halted for an extended period of time, since there were only 5,000 gallons of appropriate gasoline available across China. These bases would not ensure Japan's defeat. There were numerous raids from these Chinese locations, but the range of China limited targets. The B-29s just managed to reach Japan's southern edge, nibbling at its heels. The turning point came in mid-1944, when the Japanese were forced to relinquish control of the Mariana Islands. The loss led to the downfall of the Tojo Cabinet. These were the B-29's stepping stones to Tokyo. The three islands of Guam, Saipan, and Tinian were barely 1/500 miles from Japan. Construction of 5 B-29 bases on the three islands began. Crews are working hard to convert coral formations into airstrips despite tropical heat and sudden rainstorms. On October 12, 1944, the first B-29 arrived at Isley Airfield in Saipan. Charlton Josie, the Pacific pioneer, flew the 21st Bomber Command's new leader, Brigadier General Haywood S. Hansel. As Arnold's chief of staff in Washington, he oversaw the India-China assault. He would now command the 21st from the Mariana. Hansel was a planner with a strong belief in strategic high-altitude precision bombing. The bombs poured down on industrial and economic targets across Japan. But the consequences were once again disappointing. B-29 losses increased as the enemy focused defensive fighter squadrons on these targets. The high altitudes that the B-29s had to reach for such missions posed significant operational challenges, with many aircraft crashing on the long voyage back to the Mariana. Arnold needed results. Hansel was removed from command, and Arnold replaced him with General Curtis Emerson LeMay. Perhaps this man can alter the tide. Iwo Jima was seized shortly after LeMay's appointment. The island is about midway between the Mariana Islands and Tokyo. It was held by the Japanese until February-March 1945, when it was captured by United States Marines with a heavy loss of life. The still hot volcanic rock of Iwo Jima was cut into an unstoppable aircraft carrier. There was now a safe stop in case of an emergency. Fighter escorts for B-29s and Japan were finally being pushed back. LeMay, who would not adhere to any single military theory, would experiment with fresh ideas to achieve results. Ideas that would eventually burn Japan's heart out.
Well, I'd say that they respected and feared him, but they knew that he could do the job and hopefully would keep them alive. Previously, they'd been suffering serious losses in the B-29s, and LeMay came along, changed the tactics, made the airplane work.
LeMay discovered that Hansel had transformed the B-29 sites in the Mariana into a well-oiled fighting machine. The Navy had sent large cargo stocks to serve the vast fleet, keeping them securely out of range of Japanese strikes. Aside from tactical reasons, LeMay had no other explanation for the 29th's failure to perform. He held the firearm. It was a case of employing it properly, efficiently, and to its full destructive potential. LeMay would initially allow missions to proceed as usual, with daylight attacks, hitting from high altitudes, in formation with large explosives. He would observe the mission's peculiarities and design a shocking plan. Missions were meticulously organized, and the map rooms collected massive amounts of data. This was the control center for all B-29 operations against Japan. Even as bombs rained down on Japan's cities, LeMay was planning the offensive of fire, an operation that would destroy 29 square miles of urban area in just 11 days. In the next months, further fire strikes, along with a massive aerial mining effort, would strangle and starve the country, removing all guns and ammunition except the tail armament and leaving the gunners behind would result in a significant weight savings, freeing up additional cargo for the new M69 incendiary firebombs. At night, the 29 would approach the target in a single line from 5,000 to 8,000 feet, escorted by Pathfinder B-29s, and mark it with a massive cross of fire. LeMay found that Japanese anti-aircraft guns were ineffective at low to medium altitudes, and their night fighter capabilities were severely constrained. Lower altitudes required more range, a threefold bigger payload, and less strain on the engines, less strain on. Engine weariness was possibly the most dangerous opponent during these high-altitude missions. These elements served as the foundation of the LeMay treatment. Flying back to the Mariana following operations, the crews now had Iwo Jima as a safe sanctuary for emergency landings. With every likelihood of ditching in the huge Pacific and little hope of rescue, Iwo was a blessing for those who had previously made it their home. continuous voyage from Iwo to Tinian Saipan and Guam, the majority of 29's safely returned to fly again. However, not everyone was as lucky. During the first big fire raid, 14 of the 279 B-29's sent out met the same end. Bad losses, but very small. That raid, which occurred on the night of March 9, 1945, is regarded as the single most destructive air raid in history, surpassing the famed Dresden bombings, as well as both atomic strikes. Unusually strong winds that night fanned the various fires into a storm. Violent air currents pushed the bombers up thousands of feet, their fuselages coated by smoke. Tokyo could be seen shining from 40 miles away. This isn't Hiroshima. In one night, 25% of Tokyo's buildings were destroyed, covering roughly 16 square miles. There are 1 million homeless people. 150,000 people died, were injured, or went missing. The LeMay procedure was a startling success. The Pacific bases were anything from idyllic islands. It can be hot and dusty at times, but sometimes wet and muddy. Low morale was always evident. Men living close together in tent communities, a cargo culture far from home, and the terrifying prospect of not returning from the next mission.
The other one was when I was upside down over Tupolev. But that wasn't too bad. Only twisted the tail on the airplane. That's a big tail. It's not designed to fly upside down. When I hit that thermal, we were dropping bombs to burn out Tokyo. When I got there, a lot of other planes had been there first, and I didn't realize it, but there was so much heat had been generated. We were going in at 8,000 feet low. We hadn't any more dropped our bombs, closed the bomb bay doors, and bang, I hit that damn thing, and it flipped us right upside down. And I couldn't see out because all the smoke and grease and everything else all over the airplane just covered it. I was not a good instrument pilot, didn't worry me, so I just climbed on out. And I knew it wasn't flying right, though. I just flipped on autopilot. We headed back for base. Flying kind of like this, though. I knew something was wrong. Finally got back to base. Went back to look at it, and the whole vertical stabilizer was twisted from being upside down. And all that, those forces. So I got a new airplane.
Which airplane was that?
I think it was Lucky Strike, if I remember.
The B-29 became part of the crew. A fair amount of customization occurred as the vehicle was treated as if it were a brand new Cadillac. For example, some crews did not view the official decision to remove the 20mm tail cannon as a positive step. The twin 50 machine guns would be insufficient to dissuade opposing fighters. One crew fitted up this scary tin set dressing. The mere sight of this monstrous gun kept warriors well out of range of its ineffective sting. Other types of customization included the well-known B-29 nose painting.
When the order came to remove the nose art, there was a ripple of discontent. But in a military situation, orders were orders. Where the order came from, nobody really seems to know. There is one version that says that a number of B-29s went back to the United States, and when the nose art was seen, there were objections to the lurid nature of it, and therefore the order came back to the people in the combat zone to remove it. Other versions of that story are that it was decided at the group level by the group commanders. Some wanted to run a cleaner operation than others.
The men's high admiration for their aircraft made their loss all the more devastating. Josie is a jolly person. On April Fool's Day, 1945, a tiny explosion was observed immediately after takeoff. She caught fire and sank into Saipan's Bay. Super Wabbit, lost on February 19, 1945. The Japanese suicide strike severed both wings. She went down. There are no survivors. Little Joe hit over Miyako-no-jo on April 29, 1945. The crew got out. Only 6 of the 11 men were rescued. Nose art gave them memorable names. But this is unquestionably the most memorable name of them all. On July 16, 1945, United States scientists detonated the first atomic device. In less than a month, a modified B-29 from the newly formed 509th Composite Group would carry the 700-pound uranium bomb high above Hiroshima.
After a photographing session that made us feel like a Hollywood premiere, we got off at about 3 o'clock in the morning in the darkness and headed for Iwo Jima, which we reached about sunrise. We made certain adjustments and tests on the bomb during that flight. We then headed for the Empire, and the weather improved as we went along. We felt that it was our lucky day, and we knew it was as we made the final approach toward Hiroshima, which the navigator hit right on the button. Bombardier took over, identified the target, and everything went with perfection not approached in the rehearsals. The bomb was finally released exactly at the designated hour, and the explosion occurred as planned. My navigator had me perfectly lined up with the target. When I touched in with my sight, I could clearly see the city of Hiroshima within my bomb sight. Then I clutched in and took the run, and I felt the bump of the airplane. I was greatly relieved because I knew the unit had gone from the airplane that we had successfully delivered. It meant so much to the Army Air Forces, American science and industry.
The bomb was armed in flight by Captain Parsons to avoid any mishap on takeoff. Enola Gay flew unopposed over Hiroshima.
The bomb was armed in flight by Captain Parsons to avoid any mishap on takeoff. Enola Gay flew unopposed over Hiroshima.
Well, as the bomb left the airplane, we took over manual control, made an extremely steep turn to try and put as much distance between ourselves and the explosion as possible. After we felt the explosion hit the airplane, that is the concussion waves, we knew that the bomb had exploded, everything was a success, so we turned around to take a look at it. The sight that greeted our eyes was quite beyond what we had expected, because we saw this cloud of boiling dust and debris below us with this tremendous mushroom on top. Beneath that was hidden the ruins of the city of Hiroshima.
At 9:15 a.m. on August 6, 1945, 485 square miles of Hiroshima and 78,000 of its residents were destroyed. The Enola Gay, named after Tibet's mother, is still the single most destructive weapon used in rage. Japan, in shock, was unable to reach an agreement on peace. The second bomb over Nagasaki was carried by a B-29 boxcar. Another city vanished beneath a towering mushroom cloud. Fears of death grew in the final days of the war as bombing continued after Nagasaki. All bombers returned when peace was declared. The war had over, but the B-29 still had much to perform. Variants emerged as a result of the post-war glut of 29's. The Bakusin Dreamboat was a B-29B modified for long-distance flying with the interior stripped bare extra fuel tanks. Inserted anti-gump, chinless nacelles built, and tires filled with lightweight helium. It was intended to break the world distance flight record in November 1945. The flying fuel tank covered 198 miles in 35 hours. In 1946, the B-29 atomic bomber flew tests of a more powerful A-bomb over the Marshall Islands in the South Pacific. The criminal, a familiar face. General LeMay, now Deputy Chief of Staff for Research, boarded the B-29. The Marshall Group is 5,000 miles from the United States and surrounded by large tracts of ocean. The first test target is Bikini Atoll. The B-29 Dave's Dream was specifically modified to accommodate the test bomb in its bay. It would transport the payload across a group of 93 unmanned Navy warships around the tiny atoll. Other 29's would serve as meteorological aircraft flying labs and photographic platforms. Unmanned, radio-controlled B-17 drones would fly through the fallout cloud, collecting samples. Naval observation ships sat 14 miles from the target site. A powerful explosion rocked the atoll and naval target ships at 34 seconds past 9 a.m. on July 1st. Beginning Operation Crossroads and a series of nuclear weapon tests through the 1950s. The B-29 was the true pioneer of the United States Air Force's in-flight refueling system. Fuel was supplied to the receiving aircraft via a long hose, with the pilot closing in on the end drogue, with a probe as seen here on the wingtip. Much more successful was Boeing's unique flying boom, a rigid telescopic tube that was flown into place by an operator in the old tailgun compartment. The arm's tip had an aerodynamic V-shaped wing that allowed for steering. A panel of lights on the belly of the 29 instructed the receiver pilot to maintain station. During normal flight, the arm could pivot beneath the tail. This clip of a KC-97 tanker and an early B-52 using the B-29's flying boom system shows coupling and decoupling in greater detail. The Soviets have their B-29. The Tupolev Tu-4 was a direct duplicate of the B-29's that were detained during the war. 1,200 were erected. Ironically, the Hap-Arnold Special was one of the 29's that was meticulously disassembled and bolted together. The SB-29 Super Dumbo was essentially a B-29 outfitted with survival and rescue equipment. Its principal feature was an A-3 lifeboat carried beneath the fuselage that could be lowered to downed air crews. There were 16 SB conversions carried out. The massive A-3 lifeboat, which was motorized and carrying all manner of survival items, had to have been a blessing to count. The B-29D was first flown in 1947, and its name was changed to B-50. The B-50 had a significantly stronger airframe. Later variants had 700-gallon wing tanks and a single-piece plexiglass nose cover. Its Pratt & Whitney R4360 engines generated 3,500 horsepower. The massive tail had a foldable tip for easy access into United States Air Force hangars. With the B-50 and the B-36 in its arsenal, the United States Air Force could afford to loan the Royal Air Force 87 B-29's, known as the Washington Bomber. The B-50, the first aircraft to round the world non-stop, was the B-29's final variant. In the late 1940s, the Superfort would play another important part in the progress of aviation. This time, served as the mothership for early experimental supersonic aircraft. At the Air Force Flight Test Center at Edwards Air Force Base, the Bell rocket-powered research aircraft X-1 would try to break the sound barrier. A B-29 was utilized to deploy the Parasite aircraft at 30,000 feet. Major Chuck Yeager, a test pilot for the United States Air Force, flew the X-1 Glamorous Glennis close to the sound barrier on several occasions. On October 14, 1947, Yeager pushed the X-1 past Mach 1 into the calm airflow of supersonic flight. So began a series of B-29 parasite launchers that altered the course of aviation technology. The loading of these X-planes was particularly noteworthy because the massive B-29 had to be raised on stilts. The parasite X-plane was wheeled below, then hoisted off the ground and tucked into the modified bomb bays. Another unusual parasite aircraft was tested aboard the B-29. The XF-85 Goblin air-launched fighter was intended to be carried by the Convair B-36. The Goblin might be launched and then recovered after fulfilling its job. When the Korean War broke out in 1950, the B-29 was expected to play an active and essential role in supporting United Nations troops. It was primarily used as a medium-level interdiction weapon, destroying bridges, roads, and enemy communication lines. The B-29 was reported to be an easy target for the Soviet MiG-15, with no match for speed, altitude, or firepower. However, the Superfortress dealt many devastating blows, dropping 167,000 tons of bombs in 21 328 sorties. They operated for all but 26 days of the war, downing nearly 30 planes. 34 Superforts were lost in all. The B-29 also used the massive Tarzan radio-controlled bombs to devastating effect. In the heat of Korea, nose art resurfaced. The 29s were soon embellished with attractive women and comic book characters. But once again, the censors intervened. By the end of the Korean War in 1953, the B-29 was considered obsolete, replaced by faster jet bombers. It was relegated to second-line duties. The last operational B-29 flew its final mission, a routine radar evaluation flight, on June 21, 1960.
I think that the crews who were flying the B-29s were proud of the fact that they were flying the most advanced aircraft in the world at the time. And in one specific case, a pilot who flew B-29s during World War II has always insisted that when he flies on an airline, it must be an airline flying Boeing planes.
We more or less had the feeling that we were having the Cadillacs of airplanes. It was the super bomber. Because of that, we were all quite proud. And it was a good plane.
The Boeing B-29 Superfortress will forever be linked to the atomic bombs that ended World War II. But its true legacy is far broader and more complex. It was a machine born of desperation, a technological leap so ambitious that it nearly failed before it ever flew. In the skies over Japan, it transformed from a high-altitude precision bomber into a terrifyingly effective low-level firebomber, changing the very nature of aerial warfare. After the war, it didn't just fade away. It found new life as a record breaker, a flying laboratory, a Cold War tanker, and the mothership that carried humanity into the supersonic age. From the firestorms of Tokyo to the dawn of the jet era, the B-29 was more than just a weapon. It was an aircraft that not only ended one conflict, but also shaped the future of air power for decades to come.